Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the winter IPT-HOPE educational session. Today we have the good luck of having Cathy Bulley here from the United Kingdom, and she's going to be talking about preparing abstracts for the World Congress for Physical Therapy's presentations. So I'm going to turn my microphone off and turn the session over to Cathy. And Cathy, if you would tell us a little bit about your background too in the UK. Just for something funny that's going on, I woke up this morning to 12 inches of snow in Michigan. So the schools are closed. I'm snuggled in with hot chocolate by my fireplace with my computer today. And I'm sure that's not what's going on throughout the rest of the world. But we appreciate so much the warmth of what you're doing for us. So thank you, Cathy, and I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, and welcome to anyone who's just joined the session. My name's Cathy Bulley. I'm from Edinburgh in Scotland, or at least I'm not originally from there. I'm fairly multinational in my upbringing. But I'm a lecturer at Queen Margaret University, and writing is one of my favourite topics. It's my one of my passions is that I believe that not enough of the good work that people do actually gets out into the public domain where it can do good for people in general. So that's not my specialist area. I'm a member of IPT-HOPE and the research director for that. My area in terms of research has two main strands. One is breast cancer, looking at morbidity after breast cancer in particular, looking at how to screen for that and how to try and develop interventions that are sustainable that then help people manage morbidity after breast cancer, and looking at physical activity. And the other strand relates to multiple sclerosis and looking at the needs of carers of people who are living with multiple sclerosis. So that's a little bit different. I was asked to do, or I volunteered to do this session as we're leading up to the World Confederation of Physical Therapy in South Africa next year. The call for abstracts will be coming out in June, and we thought that it would be quite useful to have something that prompts people to think ahead of that time about what they might want to produce for that. To encourage, to inspire, I hope. There may be some people joining the session who are not interested in the World Confederation of Physical Therapy Congress, but I hope that this will be of relevance, whatever conference you're interested in submitting to, or special interest group, and I hope it helps in some way. I just wanted to check with Jackie whether my volume seems okay for people, whether if anybody is struggling to hear me, if they want to type something in the chat area to tell me that, okay? For the chat area, I think if you go to the top of your screen and hover, you should get a horizontal toolbar that allows you to open the chat area and type something. Ah, perfect. Somebody's telling me. Thanks, Stacey. That's really helpful. Apparently the volume's good. Okay, so starting off, this educational session aims to provide step-by-step guidance on writing an abstract. It's based on my learning from experience from a seminar series on writing that I did a good few years ago that was led by someone called Rowena Murray. And sorry, I put experience twice. She is very knowledgeable about writing theses, writing articles, abstracts. I've put a reference in there that you may want to refer to. It's about writing publications or articles, but within that there's some information on abstracts. So that's the basis for this session. I thought I'd focus on experience because I think that can sometimes be quite useful. So the objectives, first of all, to consider possible benefits of presenting at WCPT or any other congress or conference for you, your practice, and potentially for the people you work with and or advocate for. And I'll explain that a little bit more. To learn how to identify nuggets of learning that others could benefit from knowing. To discuss a process for writing succinct or short and yet detailed abstracts, which is quite a challenge, and to identify ways of locating support with developing and submitting our abstracts. Because in many ways, there's only so far an educational session can take you because abstracts, Jackie was saying just before the session started, we were talking, and she has an example that she could share from last time she submitted one to WCPT. We were talking about how specific an abstract is to the type of work. And I was about to say the type of study, because I'm used to submitting abstracts that are about research studies. But not all abstracts are. Some are about ideas, about concepts, about innovations and service developments. And there will be some variation then in how that's written. And I think that, so an educational session can get you started, but I think it's very important then that there's follow-up to that. So we'll talk more about that. I would really like this to be an interactive session, if at all possible, and technology allowing, because I am fairly new to this kind of presenting, although I really like the idea you can sit here in your own house, especially if there's lots of snow outside, like there is for Jackie. So I think it's a really nice thing to be able to do it like this, but I'm fairly new to it. So my hope is that we can make this an interactive workshop, that we can produce some ideas by the end of it, that I can integrate some spaces for thought and some time for questions, and that we can share ideas and support within the session. So I think that that would still benefit people who access the session later as a recording, because they might be able to see the results of that, although there will be some pauses that they might use to make some cups of tea. Or they could use them to do the work that I'm suggesting. So could I check with people who are listening what you think of that? If you think it would be nice to have an interactive session and to put some of your ideas into the chat room and get feedback and discussion going, could you type yes in the chat room? Again, if you use the toolbar, hover your mouse at the top of the screen and you can find that chat icon. So if people think it's a good idea, just type yes for me. And if you don't, you'd rather I just kind of get on with it, then if you could type no. And if I don't hear much, I'm going to assume that most people are accessing this as an educational session later. So I'm getting one comment from Stacey saying, yes, but I don't have a microphone. That's fine. If you just want to type your thoughts, the work that I'm suggesting that we do, it might be easier for you actually just to type it in, and then we can read it and give you some feedback. So that would work. What with the fact that you're already typing is great. So I'm not sure that there are any other people actually on the line right now. Oh, Darren's there. Great. So Darren, what I'm suggesting is that we make this an interactive workshop. No problem that you're late. So I'm getting some feedback that that seems like a good idea, and we'll carry on that way. Thank you. Right. So first of my objectives, looking at the possible benefits of presenting. My question is often to myself, why do I put myself through this? Because I don't particularly like public speaking, believe it or not, and I can get quite nervous about it and feel quite insecure and a lot of adrenaline going on. Then there's also the deadline over the abstracts and trying to fit it into everything else you're doing. And you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing it? What's the motivation? And I would say that, first of all, I think it's advocacy. I think we as physiotherapists or other health professionals, if other health professionals are accessing this session, I think that we are often driven to a degree by the need to advocate for people, whether that's our staff, if we're managers, leaders, or our service users. It might be people that we're interacting with to help prevent problems occurring. We're trying to help in some way often. And I think that part of that is playing the game, I call it. There's a bit of a game with trying to make sure the information is available to people so that they can create an argument for a service, or they can connect the dots in an argument to explain why something may be of benefit. If we don't get that information out there, then people are left with gaps, and they can't say, well, actually, someone else has done this, and they found this. it also allows us to build on what's already been done rather than recreating the wheel, we call it. In the UK, we have that saying. I think it's probably a fairly Western saying. We don't want to keep recreating the same thing over and over again. We want to learn from each other and build on that. Communicate our mistakes, communicate the limitations of things we've done, things that we would suggest someone else did. So I think that advocacy and moving our professions forward is a big driver. Feedback and idea development, I think, is incredibly important, especially if you're a student, and many people are doing some kind of CPD, some kind of master's, PhD perhaps. Some people are doing courses of study where they might need to be assessed on their argument, on their the piece of work that they're doing. And presenting gives you peer feedback at a very useful stage if you submit in relation to your deadlines. If you submit something to a conference before you have to produce your final piece of work, it can give you some very useful feedback on whether you're communicating effectively, whether your argument needs work, whether somebody else has pieces of information that would really benefit your argument. So feedback and idea development, discussion with people who have like minds and who are interested, it's very valuable. Networking and team formation, you're putting yourself out there and you're saying, I'm interested in this thing. And then people who are also interested in that can gravitate towards you. They might know your face if you've done a platform presentation and relocate. They might see you and come and talk to you. If you're doing a poster presentation and you have to stand by the poster, they can come and find you and talk to you about it. And who knows, maybe you develop a network, or maybe you have someone you can email back and test your ideas with. Maybe you actually end up forming a team with them and working up some kind of grant proposal. There are many possibilities. Another thing is to grow as a person, as a professional. There are a lot of transferable skills involved in submitting an abstract and presenting, and you can take them with you wherever. It's a good indication of that growth. Doing the presentation and gaining feedback from that can then increase your confidence quite a lot. So I think that that's a very important part, your own personal development. And career development. You may be doing lots of pieces of very interesting work, service development or work with your patients, audit, but if it doesn't get into the public domain, it's harder to show evidence of that in your CV. So having something published as a conference abstract shows what you're already doing. It provides this external validation, it provides documented evidence of what you're doing anyway. So I think that's another really valuable one to do. And I'll show you later, but for WCPT, all the conference abstracts are published in the journal Physiotherapy. So it's very useful. So moving on to the second objective, which is all about how to identify nuggets of learning. Nuggets of learning are what I use to describe bits of information that other people can benefit from. So I used Wiktionary, which I wouldn't usually advise students to do, but I liked its definition of nugget, which is a tidbit or a little piece of something valuable, a nugget of wisdom. And I really like that because it communicates what I'm trying to say. What you've been doing may not be earth-shattering. It may not change the world, but very little of what we do nowadays would change the world all on its own. And that's okay. I think that it's very, very important that you are able to communicate the bits of evidence or bits of insight that others could use to build their consensus, their sense of their argument, the strength of their argument. So I think that that's what I would say is a nugget of learning. That's what I would use as the basis for myself to decide what should go forward, what I could submit. And that's something that helps me to think in terms of it doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be a randomized controlled trial. and that's okay. So new knowledge, insight, a way of doing something that you think could benefit someone somewhere. I'm just reading the chat, and I think it's really interesting. I'm seeing Jackie saying, I'm an introvert as well, believe it or not, but I get excited about sharing and talking about what I've found in my research. And I'm excited to learn about what others know, as I may have missed something. It's helpful to discuss and learn from others to develop and grow a research concept or design. And I totally agree. I think that really nicely sums up what I was saying in the previous slide about why we do this, and also relates to what I'm talking about here, about it doesn't need to be a big thing to communicate. And introverts can do it. I'm one too. So moving on, I thought it might be useful. I'd really like to have a bit of time in a few minutes to ask you to try typing something in that you're thinking is a possible topic for you for an abstract. And I thought I'll try to help trigger some ideas by giving you an indication of what's gone before. So I've got some examples from World Congress Physical Therapy in 2015 in Singapore. They had 2,147 abstracts, which is quite a large number. They had tracks education, global health, professional issues, professional practice, and research methodology. And I think that's really nice. It's quite a wide range of different areas. Professional practice is where you probably see most of the more studies, for example, of testing out a new intervention. Professional issues, it can be more things to do with management, for example. So I'm going to give you some examples so that it clarifies a little bit how these might differ. You might find that your abstract could fit in one or the other and choose to be strategic about where you put it. And hopefully that will become a bit clearer. So this is the URL to these abstracts, and this is where they're published. Physiotherapy 2015, Volume 101, Supplement 1. Okay, so education example. This one I picked out purely because it just fascinated me. It just jumped off the page, and I thought that sounds really interesting. And I tried to pick examples from different countries, and to pick a couple that relate to the IPT-HOPE topics. This one is about empathy. Can it be enhanced by learning from the interactions between health professionals with a disability and their patients? I thought that sounded very interesting. And that's about education. And I suppose the insights from that potentially being used in the education of physiotherapy students, physiotherapists. It's by Opium Parks, and it's from the UK. Global health example, I like the look of this one. Physiotherapy management of idiopathic clubfoot in Tanzania, experiences and challenges. And I think this one could have probably gone in the professional practice track or in the global health track. I like the fact it's in global health because it looks like it may include some cultural issues that it's really interesting to look at in terms of the experiences and challenges part. So yeah, that one is by Sheo et al. And from Tanzania, so Sheo and Van der Berg. Professional issues, again, this one really interested me. Cultural adaptation of physiotherapy services, changing manager attitudes. And this one was about cultural awareness in physiotherapy by Nitzan et al. And it's from Israel. So you can see how that relates more clearly to practice. To professional issues, to this one particularly to management. Professional practice, this one I picked out because it relates to oncology, and it is expects of Tai Chi Qigong training on aerobic capacity and arterial hemodynamics in survivors of nasopharyngeal cancer by Fong et al. From Hong Kong. So it gives you an example. That one looks a bit more your kind of intervention testing out type of abstract. And then this is the research methodology track. And one thing I noticed was I was looking for HIV related and palliative care related abstracts because the professional practice is broken down into, say, MSK, and there's a section on oncology. But there wasn't one on palliative care or on HIV, which probably reflects the numbers of abstracts submitted, or just that people who did studies or submitted abstracts in these areas, they particularly put them in different tracks, such as research methodology. I'm not sure. I didn't do a search to see what else was there. But this one's about increasing capacity of rehabilitation providers in the management of HIV and knowledge translation intervention. And I really like this idea that of doing an intervention to take evidence and get it integrated into practice. So by Solomon et al. From Canada. So that's another example. I'm just reading Darren's comment here that he's an extrovert, yet still finds submission anxiety. Yes, I don't think the submission anxiety necessarily relates to introversion and extroversion. I think we can all still feel insecure. And I think that motivation of wanting to help somebody can overcome the anxiety. It's just, you live through it. So, the other thing is, submit the abstract and don't think about the presentation too much, and then if it gets accepted, deal with it later. Your nugget. I would like you to have a think about what your nugget could be. What would you present? So I think I'm going to give you a 1-minute pause and see if you are interested in typing in an idea of what you might like to present about. I'm going to just give 60 seconds to see, because I don't want people who watch this later to lose the will to live waiting for us to talk again. So I'm going to start 60 seconds now, and just if you feel willing to share, just type in what you're thinking you might present about or submit an abstract about. Okay, starting now. Okay, that's been a minute, and I'm seeing some really interesting comments here. Jackie's talking about, I agree, a submission for a platform approach to may be part of a study that is not complete. So currently examining resting cardiovascular measures among women with cancer, and since the presentations are only 10 minutes, you wouldn't be able to present the whole study. But you could present a part of it, such as heart rate variability, or just resting heart rate, or just basal metabolic rates. I think that's a really good point, and I'll come back to that, and I'll try to remember you to use examples from what you're saying about an abstract, or one presentation deals with a little bit of a study often. From Darren's been collecting admission results of the WHO DAS2 of all patients seen during inpatient admissions. The nugget would be, is this similar to other inpatient settings internationally? So that would be interesting. So looking at, I'm assuming, is the WHO DAS, it's not something I'm familiar with, is that quality of life? Maybe you could explain. It's an ICF measure of disability. Great. So you could present a kind of profile of what people are like, and then get some information about, would you be comparing to established data that's already available? So then from Stacy, then establishing what rehab intervention they go on to receive. That's interesting, yes. From Stacey, several ideas. I'm currently working on a study of potential benefits of prehabilitation for breast cancer patients undergoing mastectomy. That sounds really interesting. So if that's underway, and we're talking about June, do you think that you'll have some data that you could use, early data, or do you think you'd be presenting, for example, a protocol, proposal of what you're doing, how you're going to move forward? Right, personally I'm working with a group with Chiwi Tan and some other, sorry, I'm trying to keep track. I'll just finish what I was saying. I'm working on basically a systematic review looking at telehealth interventions in oncology, but I don't know if we'll be at the stage for that. It's a driver to try and get to that stage, though. It's very useful. That's another benefit I didn't put it earlier, is that it can prompt you to move forward work that you might be lagging behind on. Looking at Stacey saying that she agrees with Jackie that having updates on incomplete studies is valuable, especially when preparing a lit review. Yeah, that makes sense, knowing what's out there. And Jackie saying that she's presented some pilot data at previous conferences, and it leads to great ideas on how to improve the study. Yes, I definitely think so. And it doesn't mean you can't present it again later. As in, presenting pilot data doesn't mean you can't then go on and present the final study or the same sort of aspect of the final study once you have complete data. You just make it clear. So I think that's really interesting, some really interesting ideas. I'm going to move forward in the slides. So poster or platform? This question, in my memory, and somebody might be able to clarify for me whether this happened last time, I didn't submit to Singapore because I was on maternity leave, but I did to Vancouver and to Amsterdam. And I have a memory that you can pick either poster or platform or both. But if anyone remembers differently, let me know. The information is not really available yet that I could see on the website for Cape Town, which makes it more difficult. But when I thought through how, Darren's saying I think it's one or the other. Okay, so when I make the decision, I always think that poster is less pressure. It's quite a nice introduction if you're new to presenting at conferences. It's one-to-one, more likely to be one-to-one discussion or to a small group of people, because you've got a slot where you'll stand next to your poster. It's timetabled, and people can come and see you. So they might have browsed through their program and thought, yep, highlighted that one. They definitely want to go to that and come and speak to you about it, which is quite nice. On the other hand, and they can also go and see the poster at any point. So if they're having a decision between two presentations they'd like to see at the same time, and they end up going for the other one, well, they can still go and see your poster, whereas a platform presentation, that's not possible. So it's useful, but you can convey less information in a poster, and people might miss your slot anyway to come and speak to you. One thing I've always found quite useful, and I've done myself from watching other people do it, is to put a plastic wallet, attach a plastic kind of wallet thing to the poster board, and slot into that my business cards and take away handouts of the poster itself, of the abstract. And I've always really liked it when people do that, because you can convey more information than the abstract has, and a bit more detailed information beyond that if you want. It's also an invitation to someone to contact you if they're interested. A platform presentation does have more pressure, especially if you're not someone who likes public speaking. There's the pressure of the time as well. Jackie and I were talking before about how important it is that people stick to time. If you've got 10 minutes to present, you have to finish in 10 minutes because you'll get cut off. And there's a good reason for that. People will be moving between sessions, so they can't have people running over. It's also just a bit unprofessional, but it's hard, and you have to actually practice it, spoken out loud, practicing it to make sure. I've also added in there, you're more visible. So a person might speak to you directly afterwards if they're interested in your work, or they might just see you around the conference and think, that's someone I want to talk to. You can include more information overall, and it is more prestigious overall. And Jackie's said that as well, that you can choose, for WCPT, you can choose between platform or poster, but the reviewers can move them into either venue depending on the results of the review. So I'm guessing what you mean there is a reviewer could look at it and say, I'd like it to be in, but we don't have space for a platform presentation and we're going to suggest poster instead. And Jackie's also saying that she typically submits as a platform as it's more prestigious. And I would agree, as an academic, there's the driver from my workplace that suggests I do that. I'm more likely to get funding support for a platform presentation than I am for a poster presentation, although it's not always strict. But yes, if the committee decides the work isn't ready for a platform, they can offer you a poster presentation. So I'm catching up on the comments. So that's quite useful to know for what to tick and thinking about it. And if you think I'd like to give this a go, but I'd like to ease into it, tick a poster instead. Right, okay, succinct but detailed. How do you write it? For WCPT, the word count I think is 500 words. That's what it's been in my past experience. I checked some of the abstracts online, and they are under 500. So tell me if you think it's different from last year, but it's frustrating not having the abstract submission guidelines up yet, but I think it's 500 words. Now, for many conferences, it's often fewer than that. 500 is actually fairly generous, but it's still tight. So I'll go through a few things, but the things I tend to think about are, what is my burning message? What is my main point, take-home message? What type of abstract am I writing? Is it a kind of research study, data collection type abstract, or is it more of an ideas, concepts type of abstract? Who are you trying to influence or to affect or to impact on? Who's your audience within the WCPT Congress audience? Who is your audience? And what is the key information? So, your burning message. The method I usually suggest to students for article writing and for abstract writing is to actually vocalize, to get somebody who's willing to listen to you for 2 minutes, and to put a bit of a time limit on it, and to speak out to them answers to the questions below, such as, what is your main message? What do you most need to say? And what is the reason for the study? And what do the results mean? Now, you don't have to ask all those questions or get them to ask you all those questions, but something that triggers you to actually try to explain to them in a short period of time the crux, the core of what you're doing. It can be very useful. And as soon as you've finished speaking, write it down. And it can help you to write it in lay terms, in much more presentable, less jargon type way. And it can help you to be concise. And I would suggest doing that several times. Just test it on different people. Talk to people in the coffee room and tell them what you're doing. It'll also increase your coherence when talking, which is useful when you're working up to a presentation. But while it's useful to vocalize, it's not ideal right now. So what I would suggest is that you try writing something down in the next minute or so and share if you feel willing about your burning message. Try to get to the core of what you want people to know. Now, it might be a bit difficult if it's pilot data and you're not there yet. Try and, if that's the case and you haven't done your analysis, for example, try and write down what you're trying to achieve through this. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. If you're still typing at the end of that, I'll give you a little longer. Okay. Jackie, before we start, sorry, Jackie's just saying now that the abstract limit last year was 500 words and that the APTA is 275 words. that's really tight. So you can be glad of the 500, I think. Great. Okay, I'm going to start the minute or so just now. Okay. Okay, I'll stop the time there, but if anyone wants to add anything else, feel free. That's really interesting. I'm seeing Darren's key points that adults living with HIV present with disability on admission to hospital, specifically mobility impairments, requiring rehabilitation interventions. So I can see this very much as an advocacy type abstract where you're trying to say that there's a problem that we need to address. And I think that's really nice. That's the so what factor. Why should I care? Well, this is why I should care. I've indicated that for me, I really want to find sustainable ways to support people after treatment for cancer, because the National Health Service in the UK has a limited budget and maintenance just isn't always possible. So I'd like to try and find new ways of providing support to people, because life after cancer isn't usually, there are remaining effects. Jackie says, my burning message is that exercise testing and training requires modification for people with cancer for safety and efficacy in testing and training. Okay, so it's about how do we do this in the context of people with cancer. And Darren saying very much yes. So that's really useful. How did you find the experience of trying to get that in quickly, just type it in quickly? Did that help you to pin down what the core of it is for you? I'm just interested to see whether or not people found that useful. If people are listening back to this later, I'd suggest trying to do some of these exercises as you watch it. Make use of the time that we've left blank. Darren's saying it is interesting because often we need to focus on the elevator pitch, and this is a good way of doing that. I take what you mean, the elevator pitch, being able to just speak it out on off the cuff. Excuse me, I've got an alarm going and I don't know why. And Jackie's saying it does help since I have to get to the point, and that is my elevator message, yes. And great minds, you're both saying the same thing. Okay, right, so narrowing down. One thing, I think all of you kind of got to the point very clearly, and it seemed to me that for both of you, there's a clear message that you can then support, a single message. Although for Jackie, I guess you would be focusing it on a specific aspect of exercise testing and training, because you obviously couldn't do all of it in one abstract. I'm not saying you can't do all of it, you know. I'm sure you can do an awful lot in a study, but yes. So yes, you're saying that too. So what I often find is when people do this, they actually may come up with several messages, several burning messages that they would like to say, and you have to then think carefully about how much you can say in one abstract. It takes a lot of words to provide the reasons for your work, to include the objectives, and to provide the information you need to argue your case. So you have to narrow down and make some choices. What is the most important message you want to communicate? Or it may simply be it's not the most important, but you're going to stage it and submit an abstract on something else, either a second abstract to WCPT, you can do that, or to another conference later. Each message usually involves quite a lot more work. So you've got the more background, the more methods, more data, more discussion, more clinical implications. So you have to think of it in terms of the abstract is a small nugget. It's not a massive piece of gold, it's a small piece of gold. It limits you in a good way, though. You have to be selective, and that makes presenting an awful lot easier. So as an example, Jackie's saying, I examined ratings of perceived exertion as well as heart rate max prediction equations, and they're both significantly different for women with breast cancer than healthy individuals. So you might choose to use one of those things, such as the ratings of perceived exertion, to communicate that message that you have to modify for women with breast cancer, or sorry, you're focusing on women with breast cancer. So you might then make that point again in another forum with the heart rate max prediction equations. So you have that, you can keep what we call banging the same drum. Right, so who is your audience? Who are you trying to convince? Now that can be quite useful because sometimes you look at your message and think, you know, this is actually not for professionals. I want to communicate this to the service users. And if that's the case, maybe you need to look for a different forum. And so you might find that there's a service user forum. For me, for my multiple sclerosis work, for example, there's MS Frontiers and can be a very valuable forum. But it may be that just repackaging it, you might also want to be convincing the professionals. So you can think about different ways you want to communicate to people, but also the different forums, how does that impact on how you write? Within WCPT Congress, you could be trying to address different audiences, managers, educators, different clinical specialists or specialist areas. So for example, I'm interested in the measurement of swelling, but from an oncology perspective and not from a musculoskeletal perspective. And I need to make sure that's clear in my abstract, keywords in particular, so that I get put in the right place and I'm grouped with other oncology abstracts and presentations rather than with musculoskeletal. Think about what type of abstract you're going to write. What kind of information are you going to use to convey your message? For example, is it a research-based abstract or is it based on theoretical literature, argumentation? Think ahead about how that's going to fit with the subheadings. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Another thing to think about, we've got a bit of time. Although it's frustrating not having the guidelines up right now, because I think they'll go up in June, at the same time, it's really nice because there's a bit of time to fill any gaps that you need to. There's a bit of time to prepare. So if you start thinking, this is what I'd like to do, but it would be really nicely rounded off, for example, by doing a survey. Maybe you've done some kind of management, a change in service delivery, for example, and it would really round off your abstract to have a little bit of information about how your staff feel. So that could be quite interesting, and that might be doable in the time remaining. I'd also suggest that you look at examples, thinking about the kind of work you want to write about. Look at examples, use the URL to go to the WCPT Singapore site and look at what's been done. The great thing about abstracts is they don't take long to read. And at that point, then I would say you start to structure your abstract. Once you have a sense of what type of abstract you're writing, start to structure it. Use previous examples, see whether they have used the same headings. WCPT asks for a structured abstract, which means it's got subheadings. And that's going to depend to a degree. The actual subheadings will depend to a degree on the track, and there'll be information about that. But what I'm familiar with and what I've seen in some of the abstracts I looked at before this is that it has background, purpose, methods, results, conclusions, implications, and keywords. So you can easily create a template for yourself and start to populate that with notes. And I would say, to start with, don't think about sentences. Think about keywords, sorry, not the keywords that go at the bottom that index your abstract, but think about the key information that you need. So just don't try to write coherently to start with. I don't start writing with the beginning. I tend to try to focus, as I was saying to you, what is your burning message? I try to use that as the anchor to what I'm doing so that I stay on track and I can be strategic about what goes into it. So when I'm writing, I often start with the purpose. So if it goes background, purpose, methods, I'll start with the purpose. And remember my burning message and write that down. Then I add the background that supports that purpose. The so what factor, why should we care about this purpose? How many people experience this living with this condition, or how much does it cost, this condition or this issue? Why should we care? I often talk, I think a lot of people talk about that as the so what factor. So what? So you're trying to convince people, you're trying to draw them in right at the start. Moving on from there, I tend to move to the results next. Sorry, I was hearing some funny noises, but I think a microphone might have been on. I move to the results from there. What data or theory or key insights relate clearly to that purpose? There will be lots and lots of information that you might want to include, but you have to be selective and pick out the bits that relate to the purpose. So do your selectivity at the start, and then make sure that that's lined up with every other section in the abstract. Move from there to your methods. What process, thinking, methods relates clearly to the results that you're presenting? Now, it may be if you're doing a big study or a much larger project of some kind, that there are lots of methods and processes that you've used, but there's no point in telling the reviewer everything if you're not then presenting the results from everything. So pick out what matters for those results, or for the context. It may be important to explain that it's part of a bigger study, but this is focusing on a specific aspect of that. So look at what did you do to create the key findings or insights. Then the methods. We were just talking about the methods, but moving on to the specifics. I've just listed a few things. I then tend to pick out the key information. If I have any kind of project report or proposal, protocol, anything that I have written already, I'll go through with a highlighter looking at what are the key things. What demonstrates the rigor of what I did, the thoroughness of what I did, the credibility. What are the important parts of that? And for a kind of more traditional study using data, for example, you would be looking at things like what philosophy or design did I use, ethics, participant numbers, recruitment, inclusion, exclusion criteria, contextual information such as participant or service characteristics, processes or procedures that you followed, equipment that you used, information processing or analysis. Now, in your main document, you might have a lot of detail about all of these things, but pick out the absolute key words from that and put them into your template. I'm just looking at Jackie's comment here saying that's a very good idea. Too often when I review abstracts or even papers, there's a great deal of extraneous or unnecessary information that you don't need in the paper. Yeah, I think it's quite hard to keep everything lined up, and especially if you write it start to finish, and then don't go back and look at those linkages, whether everything's needed. So I tend to do a self-test as well. So if it's, for example, it's a bit harder if it's a more conceptual paper, but if it is a more data collection style paper, you can use an article critique form, for example. I would go to the Critical Appraisal Skills Program, CASP website that I put there, and pick out the most appropriate article critique form. And yes, that's about an article, but it's giving you the information that a reviewer should look at in relation to the key information about rigor and trustworthiness. And so you can look at that and it can cue you into something you might have missed. And yes, in an abstract there will be far, far less detail in relation to each of those points, but it can just trigger you to what you've missed. I then move on to my conclusions and implications and keywords. When I'm writing my conclusions and implications, remember that there's a symmetry to writing. At the start, you're saying, so what? Why should I care? How does this fit in the world? Why does it matter? At the end, you're saying, this is what I found out, or this is what I've argued, and this is why it matters. So your conclusion and your implications, there should be a symmetry to it. Relate it very clearly to that burning message. Make sure you only include conclusions that are supported by the information you included in the results. That can be difficult when what you're doing is part of a bigger project. You can forget that you're not doing all of it. And your conclusion can be too big and not justified by what you wrote before in your results. So try very carefully to keep it aligned. Try not to make disparaging or overinflating claims. And what I mean by that is what you've done may not change the world and won't change the world, but it isn't necessarily terrible. There may be limitations within what you do. There are limitations within almost every study. And there will be strengths too. And you can state that the strengths of the study as well as the limitations and what that means in terms of how far you would suggest people apply the results. But there is value there, or you shouldn't really be submitting it. So try not to do it down in your writing because there is value there. But also don't make overinflated comments because, as I said, it's very unlikely to change the world. Nowadays, there's too much information about for any single piece, any single nugget to change the world. But we're trying to add it to a bank or a consensus and to give strength to what's gone before and to develop from what's gone before and inform people who are coming after about what would be a good idea. So you've got to be very, the word's tentative and cautiously. There are words you can use that say, for example, in this sample suggests that, and give it a conclusion. You can be cautious without being disparaging. Keywords, as I said before, and this was a suggestion from Darren over email a wee while ago, that it can be a very good idea to use the keywords strategically to achieve a bigger group of abstracts that are all looking at a similar area and to have a greater presence at the conference, I think. That's the impression I got from what you were saying, Darren. I hope I've got that right, and I think it's a really good idea. So writing, I'm just going to check the time, because I thought this was going to take far less time than it has, but the interactions really made it longer, and I like that. So I'm going to just move a little faster. The writing, once you have the structure and the details in notes, you need to then start joining it up into sentences. Now, each sentence kind of needs to have maximum value. You don't want many extraneous words, unnecessary words. And I've provided an example of what I mean there, and I've highlighted in a different color each thing that I would say is a key point. 50 women, brackets, mean age 60, range 35 to 80, I should have put years, took part in each arm of a quasi-experimental study comparing exercise with usual care. Now, the only words that I would say is extraneous there are took part in, and they're connecting, they're important. In a sense, they're not extraneous either because you're saying that they were participants in an intervention. So you need to avoid having incredibly long sentences, and often you look back when you're redrafting and break it into two, but that's just an example of how you then start to link together that key information. And draft, redraft again. I would never expect to get there in one or two drafts. So, locating support. I think it is very important that we find a way of supporting each other in moving forward. One possibility that we've discussed, particularly with Darren and Jackie, is the idea of using the LinkedIn discussion network that's associated with the IPT-HOPE area, the WCPT area. I need to get clued up on that, but if you respond to my email address below, as just at the end of that sentence, if you're interested in the next 2 weeks, we'll look at setting something up. And what we're talking about, a possibility would be that we create a deadline by which people could send us drafts, and that some of us peer review each other's work, and some more experienced academics could provide some review as well. Jackie and I were also talking before the presentation about the value of providing even proofreading, because when English isn't your first language, it can be very valuable just to have someone look at the English for you. Make use of the peer support networks that you have around you as well. Some people may be less experienced to presenting, but still they can tell you if they don't understand your argument, and that's important. There's other online support and article critique forums that you can use, and colleagues can be very, very helpful. There's also a WCPT pre-submission review system, and when that becomes available, we could look at the deadline for that, and people may want to have us look at it before that deadline, for example, for English. And Darren's just highlighting there that the abstract submission deadline for Congress is October, so there's a bit of time there. I've got the program of dates there. It says subject to change, and they're not specific yet. But basically, the call for abstracts will open in June. But we could start the LinkedIn discussion beforehand to talk about ideas, what might be a valuable presentation if people want to test out their ideas for a possible abstract, and we could do that in a discussion. And then in October, there's the deadline for abstract submission. So we could work back from there to provide more support. Any questions? I've actually surprised myself that it's actually 5:58, which means this has taken longer than I expected, but we're still within the time. If anyone does have a question that they want to enter in there, please feel free in the next couple of minutes. But otherwise, good luck with it. I really hope we see quite a lot of abstracts coming forward from people who are working in our areas, and then can meet up while there and network further. Thank you very much for listening. Jackie says there's also some funding within the WCPT for people from countries with economic challenges. I know it's available for focus symposia. Not sure about abstracts, but it could be examined on the website. So that's important. It might be that your professional organizations also provide support for attending. I'll just wait and see if there are any more comments, and then when Jackie feels that she'd like to tie it up. And Stacey says, thank you for your information. It gives me a new way to look at writing abstracts, especially as a professional and newer to research. Oh, that's great. I'm glad. I'm really glad. Okay. What I might do is try and remember how to stop sharing my area and hand it back to Jackie. Does that sound like the way forward, Jackie?
Yes. Cathy, thank you so much for this presentation. It was very valuable. I particularly enjoyed the interactions. I thought that made it more fun and you know, even made me stop to think about things, you know, from a different perspective. So this was really good. I'm looking forward to your next presentation, because you're going to talk about developing a presentation once your abstract is accepted. So we'll keep participants up to date as to when that is. I also want to speak for Nina Chegbo from Nigeria, who will be sending you the International Scholar Award for this wonderful presentation today. And I just want to thank you again. This was very, very useful. I don't know, I see a comment from Darren. Wonderful, really great presentation. So I will be ending the recording, and then we'll put this up on the website so other people can access it. Does anyone have any final comments they want to make before the session ends today? Anything in the chat line? So Cathy, are you going to try and go to WCPT in 2017?
I'd really like to. It's a little bit dependent on trying to get some finances. I'll have to bring 2 very little children with me.
Oh. Yeah,
I'm really hoping to go.
That would be great. Darren does have a comment that we can also be contacted by Twitter at IPT-HOPE. So those are other places. All right, so if there are no further comments, I want to thank everybody for their kind attendance. And again, this will be up on the website for people if they would like to look at it again. And then Kathy, do you want to give people your contact information, your email address?
The email address is on one of the slides, but in case anybody didn't pick up on that, it's tbulley@qmu.ac.uk. But you can also find it in the slides if that wasn't so clear.
Okay, and then if you go to our web page through the IPT-HOPE, if you contact me, I can get you Kathy's information. So thank you again, Kathy. Bravo, this was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yep, and so I will be saying adieu, goodbye to everyone, and thank you for your kind attendance. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.